Being a good clinician doesn't necessarily make you a good educator or a good researcher. In my experience, those are very different skill sets than just being a good clinician. So my career advancement really has been propelled by seeking out those specific goals and finding mentors that contribute to them.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Skip Gill and one of the trustees for the Foundation for Orthopedic Manual Physical Therapy, which is a supporting organization for AOMPT. And I have the pleasure today to introduce Dr. Matthew Smith and to discuss his background and the study for which he received the Clinical Science in Manual Therapy Grant Award last year through our foundation. Dr. Matthew Smith is an instructor in the Department of Physical Therapy and Human Movement Sciences at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine and is a board certified orthopedic clinical specialist and a fellow of the American Academy of Orthopedic Manual Physical Therapists. He earned his Doctor of Physical Therapy from Northwestern University and a Master of Science in Orthopedic Physical Therapy from Damon University and a Doctor of Science in Physical Therapy from Bellin College. At Northwestern, he leads and contributes to coursework across the Doctor of Physical Therapy curriculum, particularly in musculoskeletal management, and has a strong interest in how clinicians develop clinical reasoning. In Northwestern's Fellowship in Advanced Orthopedic Physical Therapy Practice, Research, and Education, he coordinates the teaching practicum portion of the fellowship, including the integration of fellows into the entry-level musculoskeletal courses. Dr. Smith's work focuses on bridging education, research, and clinical care. He currently serves as the principal investigator on a clinical science and manual therapy grant examining the continuum of orthopedic manual therapy education from entry-level training through residency and fellowship to improve how manual therapy is taught and applied throughout this curriculum. In addition to this work, as a Searle Fellow and member of the New Chapter Lab at Northwestern University, he focuses on mentorship and leadership, as well as the use of generative AI to enhance student learning and feedback in physical therapy education. Welcome and glad to have you here with us today, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate you for having me as well.
Great. We'd like to talk today about your ongoing study titled Mapping the Continuum, Enhancing Orthopedic Manual Physical Therapy Education Through Instruction and Training. But first, I wanted to hear a little bit about your clinical and research pathway that led you to develop your expertise here. So what was it that sparked this interest?
Yeah, I think this interest was sparked kind of three different ways. First was my own clinical training. I really valued what OMPT, what my training brought me, and bringing, clinical reasoning to the core as a core principle for myself and my practice versus just technique execution, right? Like going through the whole clinical reasoning process. And I don't think we've always done a great job, maybe as a profession, of giving others that access that maybe don't have the means or the time or the thought to go ahead and continue that training. So I wanted to try and expand the reach of that OMPT framework. And I think no better way than with a DPT and residency training and kind of marrying some of those. And also the transfer of those principles to things outside of orthopedics. Because I know in my clinical time, mentoring students and other professionals, I've had people reach back out and say, that methodology we used when I was a student, which they may or may not have known at the time was kind of the OMPT type framework, has served me well in acute care or, my CVP, neuro, all of those different practice fields. So I just think that it has a wide applicability, and I wanted to make sure and try to share that. And then the other thing was the qualitative aspect, which I think is pretty unique to manual therapy type investigations. And that is because I just really am more interested in the why and the how that people have versus just a simple binary yes or no. And that started more when I was doing my research at Bellin College. completing my Doctor of Science there. And I think I can key into the one time where qualitative research really became something that I thought I could be more passionate about. And I was interviewing a clinician, and for to frame it, the survey question might be, did you refer to an outside provider? Yes or no. However, in talking to that person, I found that they were treating a patient, and the patient said that they had had a previous wonderful experience with another PT provider that they credited for a lot of their positive experience. And the current treating physical therapist went and found that therapist, who luckily was still in the same network or the same organization that their therapist was at, but at a different location, and coordinated between the patient and that therapist for them to continue their relationship and their care, because the current treating therapist recognized how important that relationship was to the patient. So to me, that really brought full circle of that story, and that understanding of is way more powerful than did you refer to another therapist? Yes. Right? So that is
Right.
really
Yeah.
what inspired me to really get into that discussion with people versus just a yes or no on a sheet.
Yeah, I agree. I think we probably gravitate so much towards quantitative type research that it's great to have some more qualitative studies in the mix. So, congratulations on, receiving the Clinical Science and Manual Therapy Grant Award last year. And this is a fairly new grant that's offered by the Paris Family Foundation through the Foundation for OMPT. And so I was wondering if you could just give us a little overview of the study's aims and the gaps that you were looking to fill.
Sure, sure. So myself, along with Dr. Bill Healy and Dr. Carol Courtney, are working together on this study. And overall, our research question was how instruction and mentorship of OMPT changes depending on the level of training of both the learner and the mentor. So we're really looking to identify what that continuum is from DPT education all the way through post professional training. So, looking at some of the didactic work as well as the clinical experiences the DPT has, and then going all the way through residency and fellowship to really find out what are people doing, is there, and what is the difference at each of those levels. And as a fellowship mentor, how does OMPT influence what you are instructing to those other levels of DPT or resident that might not have the OMPT emphasis that fellowship mentorship has? And then, really, the goal is to identify and come up with some strategies for those different levels of learning to help spread OMPT and that thought process throughout those levels and different kinds of curriculum. Because you look at some strategic goals of AOMPT and advancing OMPT to a wider audience. And so I think that that's a great place to start, would be trying to integrate it a little bit more into those other levels of orthopedic practice that are already happening.
Yeah, and the students really across the spectrum have to be able to see that it's different. What they're getting at residency is different than entry level. What they're getting in fellowship is above and beyond that. And I think sometimes that can get conflated together. So I'm glad to see some very specific research to try and break that out.
Yeah,
To
and
qualify.
exactly, and some of those principles are going to be the same, right? What I'm finding a lot, and again, don't quote me on this because we're still in coming up with or going through all of the data, but the overarching principles are going to be the same, but the nuance and the detail from which you expand on those things is going to change. So we just hope to shed some light to give instructors and mentors a place to start with each of these levels of learner if they're having trouble figuring out, well, how much is too much? How much is not enough? Those type of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've already kind of mentioned a couple of unique things about your design. Certainly the qualitative piece I think is great. Anything else maybe that you built into the study design or methodology that you want to highlight that might be a little bit unique?
I mean, I can talk about this study all day, but the I think some unique things that I'm really excited about are the representation that we have across the continuum of DPTs, residents, and fellows. So for this study particularly, we specifically targeted the fellowship mentors with the aim of capturing people involved in fellowship, residency, and CI. Just because in discussing with colleagues and peers, finding if you are a fellowship mentor, there is a pretty good likelihood at some point you were a CI or a residency mentor. Like we're getting you're advancing yourself through mentorship just as you advanced through training. So I think we have a really good representation there. The other thing that I think is really fun is the national representation. I think we're probably about 70% of the accredited programs in the country are going to be represented in this study. So a part of it, we did 31-hour interviews. So wish me luck on the data analysis, but we've got a great team working on it. And then lastly, I think the really unique thing is bringing in kind of that educational theory and looking at learning activities and strategies and tying them in with the developmental stages of the learner, which I don't think has been done really in OMPT specifically.
Yeah, very good. And just out of curiosity, with your kind of thematic analysis, are you looking to use kind of software to help, something like in vivo, or what is it that you're doing? Because I know it's hundreds of pages of data when you get down to it, because in qualitative studies, like words are your data. So what are you using?
Yeah, great. So shout out to Bill Healy, one of my co-investigators, but really helping me come up with the strategy for analysis and coding and things like that. But we're using in vivo. So we're going through, we have kind of the collaborative aspects of it where we can compare reliability between codes and all of that stuff. My other coders working with me are fellowship trained individuals. And just to kind of give you a little perspective, I looked at an interview right after I did it before any data analysis, and I kind of gave myself a wide-eyed look at the computer because the transcript was 35 pages long.
Okay.
So we have a lot of data that we're looking to hopefully get some really really cool stuff out of.
Yeah, excellent. And I know it's probably a bit early to ask, but maybe do you have any insights or observations from the study so far? Like maybe any preliminary results or kind of interim analysis maybe that you've done, just start to codify your themes?
Yeah, sure. I do. I would say I have enough that I'm working on an abstract for AOMPT for conference now, which is great. From a big picture perspective, I think that a super encouraging thing was looking at the fellowship level and finding how the instruction is quite variable. However, the goals and what it's looked to accomplish is very consistent. So I felt like that was very interesting to me to be able to see that everyone's going towards the same goal. They might just be taking a slightly different route. So it was very interesting to see all those different routes. The other huge
Yeah.
thing was, oh
Well,
yeah, go
just
ahead.
real quick, I mean, because I think that's an interesting point, because we have so many fellowship programs and they don't all use the same model, and they come maybe some from a little bit different theoretical backgrounds. So I guess it's encouraging to see that maybe despite the diversity of our programs, which is actually a strength of AOMT, but that you see them all kind of converging for the same, I guess, ultimate goals.
Right. And I think if any of the participants in the study are listening, like we have people that use a tree analogy for their fellowships and residency in order to show what's being filled in on the tree. Well, then another one is using kind of a pyramid to that same effect. So, like using similar frameworks, not only activities and techniques, but overarching frameworks and things like that, that I think we could, as an end goal of the study, bring people together to come up with kind of a uniform thing of I don't may not necessarily care how you do it, but that these are the things we are including to get
Yeah,
consistency even more so across the board.
yeah, great.
The other thing I think that was not to blabber on here a little bit, but the
Sure.
integration, just because I'm very interested in that DPT to resident to fellow kind of continuum. And I think that the integration of both the fellows and the residents and DPTs together has been universally praised by most. People do it in different ways, but I'm seeing a lot of that near peer instruction and giving a natural exposure to those advanced levels of training. Residents kind of have an automatic exposure to fellowship level training because they're already pursuing that next step. So those people will likely know that the fellowship exists. But from a DPT perspective, even from the lived experiences of our mentors, being exposed to a fellow or a resident seemed to be a proactive thing in seeking out more training. I always compare it to, like, I have a 7-year-old, and if we have didactic faculty, right? I feel like there's a lot of fellowship trained clinicians that are didactic faculty, but maybe comparing it to my 7-year-old, he doesn't listen when I say things. But if the cool coach on the baseball field that's a little
Right.
younger and hipper says something, he's bound to listen. So I use that analogy to kind of say, like, as a didactic faculty member, I very much appreciate the cool, hip clinicians that have this training that also continue that thought process going on.
That's a great point. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that analogy. Yeah, so this is great. I mean, this is a great area of research. Just like everything else, right? The questions are big, and you can't solve them all with just one study. So, I guess could you give me an idea of what you think might be the next steps in this area of research? So maybe things that you're thinking of, follow on big questions, or either or also, I mean, it's team sport. So, what are things that other researchers also need to be looking at, to help us kind of define this area a bit better?
Yeah, so for us specifically, I think a next step would be, once we have this continuum kind of mapped out and see what activities are where, going back to the fellowship and residency and DPT instructors and getting more specific activities of what they think can fit where, because there's gray transition zones of DPT to residency, from residency to fellowship. So using their expertise to really understand where things specifically fit. We have a lot of great examples of, let's talk about literature review, for example, but let's maybe get some standardization of what are things that we want to push forward at each level. And that would just be one brief example. So the formation of some kind of toolkit or guidebook down the road to help those DPT and residency level mentors specifically try to integrate OMPT practice. And then I think the other thing I'm learning is really getting a broader perspective from DPT and residency education. What do they think AOMPT is? Or what do they think, you know, fellowship training would add or would not add, right? Why didn't some people do fellowship and stop their residency or whatever like that? Because when we look at CAPT, for example, or ABP TRFE or ABPTS, the definitions of manual therapy are very broad. So, something I'm looking at with another Dr. Hagen at Midwestern is, we're looking at how is that definition defined amongst all of these organizations compared to what an organization like AOMPT is defining it as. So those would just be a couple kind of general ideas of where I think we look to be going.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it helps on that agenda, but also just from our general marketing, both from AOMP and from the foundation's perspective. We'd love to have that, that extra data, so to speak. If it's okay, I'd like to circle back to the CSMT grant. So, this is a phenomenal opportunity for folks that are looking forward to being able to do a grant of this magnitude. For those that are maybe looking at this, because we'll be in the cycle for this, well, we're kind of in it already. And so I was just wondering, could you give us maybe a little bit of maybe advice for the process, or just share a few thoughts about you going through the process, and what tips can you give them?
Of course, yeah. I think my main tip would be listening to feedback. So just from a little framing thing is, I submitted this grant or a similar one, not the same thing, in the first round in 2024, and it was rejected. And so instead of, throwing a pity party and deleting the file into the trash bin, I really just saved the reviewer's comments and kind of sat on it and then revisited it as the next part opened with those improvements in mind. And they were probably right. Like it is a much better proposal, a much better study, but that's because I took that advice and integrated it in. And I think the other thing is mentorship for myself. So as a relatively young researcher, Dr. Bill Healy and Dr. Carol Courtney were really instrumental in taking it to that next step. So I think depending on your expertise or level of experience, making sure that you have good mentorship available to take your study to the next level, because just realizing an email from Matt Smith versus an email from Dr. Healy or Dr. Courtney holds a little bit different weight. So as a fairly independent person, that was an area of growth for me that I think that I've come to appreciate, and I think very much helped bring this study forward.
Yeah, that's great. I guess maybe any other last thoughts or pieces of wisdom you want to share with our listeners, but maybe even more broadly about just building a successful academic or a research career.
Yeah, I think from the guy doing study on mentorship and instruction, this is not going to come as a shock, but I would say the importance of getting good mentorship for yourself. So I think, being a good clinician doesn't necessarily make you a good educator or a good researcher. In my experience, those are very different skill sets than just being a good clinician. So my career advancement really has been propelled by seeking out those specific goals and finding mentors that contribute to them. So whether that's Bill and Carol, like I have mentioned here about this study particularly, I work very closely with Dr. Amy Seitz at Northwestern, who's been instrumental in my understanding not only of orthopedics as a whole, but education and, tailoring my research. And so I'm eternally grateful for that. And getting involved, this is more of an educational research study, which I think is a big area of growth in the profession. So we have a education lab at Northwestern. It's the new chapter lab, where the collaborative hubs advancing physical therapy education research. It's a mouthful. But, aligning yourself with some of those things you may not have experience in, because a lot of people have been there. And in my experience, everybody is just more than willing to help if you ask for it and kind of follow up.
Awesome. Well, I guess this kind of finishes us up. I wanted to say thank you for your time today and just, all the insights that you've shared. I think maybe my take home messages from what you've talked about today is just the importance of our fellowship trained individuals to get involved and just remain involved in both entry level and residency training. Obviously, that's the key, along with early exposure to fellows. And just I like your approach and your interest in being explicit about figuring out, the why behind, why you're treating and what you're treating and why you're doing that. And this qualitative approach to get to some of the nuances of that answer are wonderful. So we will be looking forward to hearing the results of your study, and just wish you great luck in your future endeavors. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really much appreciate your time, and anyone feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to chat about this or anything else or collaborate. So thanks so much for having me.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Hands On, Hands Off, the official podcast of AOMPT. Subscribe now so you never miss an episode, and connect with us at aompt.org or at AOMPT on social. Opinions are those of the guests and not official AOMPT policy. See you next time.